As soon as I woke up the next morning, I grabbed 10 potatoes from my potato cellar to eat for my lunch, and I immediately took off for my ocean. I walked off towards my river and made a left turn towards the mountains. I crossed row after row after row of potatoes until I saw the mountains. I became more excited as they got closer and closer. When I reached the mountains, I headed straight up over the top. I could see my ocean once again. I ran down the mountain and walked along the ocean. I soon reached the river, so I stopped and took a drink. I then continued on till I reached the salty body of water. This time there was no tuna fish there, so I kept on going until I finally reached my salt pond. I was really hungry after that long walk, so I immediately ate all 10 potatoes. Now that my hands are free, I will be able to scoop up and carry some salt. I walked over to the edge of the salt pond so I could grab the salt. I soon picked up all the salt that my arms could hold. I began to contemplate how much salt I seemed to be able to carry. On my first trip to the salt pond, I was able to carry back enough salt to salt 40 fish. I seemed to be holding about twice as much salt as I did on my first trip. But that's not going to be enough salt. My new game plan calls for me carrying back enough salt to salt 160 fish. I have a serious problem. I've made a major miscalculation. What should I do now? If I go back to my potato cellar carrying only this much salt, I'll only have enough to salt 80 fish. That means my new game plan will fall apart. I decided to put the salt down and take a walk along my ocean. Maybe that will clear my mind and help me come up with a solution. I found it very relaxing to walk along beside the ocean. I eventually came upon something funny looking that appeared to be buried in this funny kind of dirt that I've been walking on. I then had a great idea. I'll call this funny kind of dirt sand. This thing that was buried in the sand looked very interesting, so I decided to dig it out. After I dug it out, I found that it was much larger than it first appeared. I flipped it over and noticed that it was hollow inside. Then I had another bright idea. I'll take this thing back to my salt pond and fill it with salt. It looks like it can hold much more salt than I can hold in just my arms. I also decided that this thing needs a name. I think I'll call it a turtle shell. So I picked up the turtle shell, turned around and headed off back to my salt pond. As soon as I got back to my salt pond, I decided to fill the turtle shell with salt. I put the turtle shell down in my salt pond and began to fill it with salt. Pretty soon it was filled to the brim. I picked up the turtle shell full of salt so I could carry it back to my potato cellar. It was real heavy. Holding it like this actually hurt my back. Then I had an inspiration. I'll carry the salt on top of my head. That seemed a lot easier, and my back did not hurt. It's time to head for the potato cellar. I left the salt pond and walked along beside my ocean. I passed a small body of salt water and onto the river where I took a very large drink. I left the river and continued walking along the ocean until I got back to the mountain. The climb up the mountain was very hard. The salt was heavy and the going was slow. I was huffing and puffing as I reached the top. The walk down the mountain was just as hard. The heavy salt on my head made it hard to keep my balance. I was glad to reach the bottom. I left the mountains and started across my potato field. The mountains got smaller and smaller, and I soon found myself in a sea of green. The walk across the potato field seemed to go on and on and on. My load of salt seemed to get heavier with every step I took. I eventually reached the center of my potato patch and made the final turn towards my potato cellar. My load of salt feels like it weighs a ton. I can't wait to set it down. I quickly decided that I needed a place to keep the salt. So I turned around and walked a short distance away from the potato cellar. I immediately set the salt down and was so relieved not to have to be carrying it anymore. I was totally exhausted, and it felt like every bone in my body ached. I dug a small hole in the ground and set the turtle shell and salt in it. I now had a place to store my salt. I then turned around and went back to check on my potato cellar. All seemed well, and my salted fish did not stink. By this time, the sun was starting to set. I had to run out of daylight. I quickly reviewed my trip to get salt. It had taken me 4 hours to walk from the potato cellar to the salt pond. I spent another hour walking along the ocean, finding the turtle shell and filling it with salt. The walk back, carrying all that heavy salt, was slower than the walk out. So I figure the walk back probably took about 4.5 hours. From now on, I'll budget a 10-hour day to travel to the salt pond and gather enough salt to salt 160 fish. Today's trip was very successful. I found the turtle shell and I got my salt, but it wore me out and I'm dead tired. It's time to go to sleep. I fell into a deep sleep and had a wonderful dream. It was a fantasy dream. I dreamed that the fish had taught himself how to jump out of the river, swim down the potato patch, right up to the potato cellar, jump on my pile of salted fish, and salt themselves. I also dreamed that these were huge fish. When I awoke the next morning, I realized that it was just a dream. A nice dream, but still just a dream. I considered my salt fetching day to be the first day of my work week. Starting today, I have to catch fish and dig potatoes for 4 days in a row. Time to get moving.